Hello, I'm AVX and welcome back to a second channel video. Today I wanted to talk about Brexit again for like the second or third time, and the reason I'm doing this, despite, having the no politics rule on my channel, is because for the most part I don't like to talk about politics, because when people do so, they like to do it in their own opinion. So when you read a newspaper, or you read a website, or you watch a YouTube video, what that person's trying to do is convince you of their opinion. And that's fine, convince me of your opinion is great, but when you're trying to get news and you're trying to understand an event, understanding it through the lens of someone who wants you to believe that, oh, this man has really nice teeth, or someone who wants you to believe that this man's opinion on coffee means he shouldn't be leader of the country, to me, that's something that I hate to hear, and I like impartial news personally, and that's why I figured I wanted to make today's video, because I don't want to tell you about what I think about Brexit, or what I think about this or that. What I instead want to tell you about is how exciting Brexit is going to be to follow for the next months to come, because the thing about politics around the world is it's usually not too interesting unless you live in the country, with the exception of the US this year, where, the presidential primaries were pretty crazy stuff, but the UK has just done something crazy unprecedented, and there's so many little interesting, things that are going to come of this, and I figured I'd explain why Brexit is basically like a TV show you get to watch that affects doesn't really affect all of you too much, and that really affects me. So I'd like to watch this if I lived outside the UK, so I figured I'd do like a brief guide on why Brexit is so interesting with today's video. Hopefully you would enjoy this. If you do, let me know in the comments that you do want to see more of these things. If you hate the idea of Toy Cat talking about politics, even when it is this massive step removed where I'm not going to tell you any opinion stuff, let me know that too. But with that said, let's get straight into actually talking about why Brexit is so interesting. So again, just the brief events, because I know a lot of people are like, I don't understand Brexit. The United Kingdom had a referendum, that's a countrywide vote if you don't know, last Thursday on whether we should remain a member of the European Union, which we have been since 1973, or maybe that was the referendum, but whether we should remain a member of the EU or whether we should leave it. And the reason this is a big deal is because the European Union is a massive trading bloc. It's a single market, but over time, since we joined in, again, 73, 69, something like that, since we joined back then, it's actually kind of developed into a political union. So, for instance, there is a currency. We don't have it, we've got the pound and we can keep the pound, or we can keep the pound now for sure, but we've got the pound, they've got the euro, but, they have a euro, they have a central bank, they have a lot of, joint stuff that you kind of see as more a political entity, and basically, in the UK, we're very, very against that as a people. It seems anyway, and as a result of that, and as a result of immigration for a lot of people, as a result of lots of other protest stuff. Basically, the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and that's what we basically did last Thursday. However, the big twist that came the morning after is that David Cameron decided to resign. So during the entire campaign, he said he would not resign afterwards, which implied that as soon as it's done, he hits the button. However, he said he's going to resign, and whoever the next leader is going to have to, if you don't know, pushing the button is what I'm going to call triggering Article 50 of the Lisbon Convention, or the Lisbon Treaty. Basically, to actually leave the European Union, the referendum hasn't done it itself. A leader has to actively say, we are leaving the EU, and then basically activate a thing, and that starts a 2-year time window to be gone from the EU. After 2 years, you can't keep negotiating, you're just kicked out at that point, and basically, the reason this is a big deal, the reason that it's a big deal that he's waiting until September the 2nd to elect a new leader, is because it means that we can't even start the process of leaving the EU until the 2nd of September, and the reason that's a big deal is because the referendum was, first of all, really close. By total number of votes, it wasn't. It was 1.5 million between them, as I think I learned from a comment. But the actual vote split was 51.9% to leave, 48.1% to stay, on a higher than average turnout. But the interesting thing that means that's so bizarre is the fact that it was something like 68%. But two, is the fact that lots of places voted in pretty heavily, lots of places voted out pretty heavily. So, for instance, the north of England, very, very heavy out voters. Scotland, though, very heavy in voters. Northern Ireland voted to stay in. London, our biggest city, our most prosperous city, the Europeans' biggest city and most prosperous city, all of these places, as well as Leicester, Bristol, a few other places, voted to stay in. And the reason that's a big deal is because that means that there's a very divided country. It's not like we all decided to leave. A very, again, 1.5 million extra, but 4%, depending on how you want to look at it, of more people decided to leave than to stay. And the reason that's a big deal is because it means those parts that did vote to stay are just a little upset. So the Mayor of London, who doesn't actually have any real powers, but also, the Northern Ireland, the Deputy First Minister and the First Minister of Scotland, all a little bit upset that their people voted to stay in, but yet they're going to be put out against their will, because unlike a state system like America, even though the UK is made of 4 countries, as in terms of referendums and in terms of elections and stuff, it does just come down to most votes wins. And again, even though 2 of the 4 countries in the UK, which is by the way what this is, or 3 if you count Gibraltar, but you don't. Even though 2 of the 4 voted to stay, it means as a whole, because England is the biggest, we are going to leave anyway. And again, the reason that's a big deal is because Scotland actually has its own parliament. Scotland is a nation by a whole bunch of reasons. They have their own football team. In fact, they weren't in Euros, but they were the only team. But they actually have their own parliament, and an interesting thing about their parliament is they actually technically have the power to. They don't actually have the power, but technically all matters are reserved to Scotland, except including EU ones. So when there's an EU responsibility, the UK government doesn't enact it. The UK government says, Scotland, go enact this EU law. And this means that stuff like the Lisbon Treaty, which is what we need to activate to pull out of the EU, would have to be activated by Scotland, but not really. And although the UK government can, because they have the power, they have absolute authority over the place, kind of like the way that whole thing works. But yeah, kind of in the way the UK actually can, it's going to be a big faux pas to say, yeah, so you know that you have the power to actually stop this, we're going to veto your veto, because again, you don't want to do that to Scotland for the first time, it's never been done. Especially given that the SNP, the biggest party in Scotland, are really, really anti-leaving, and Scotland as a whole, as a country, again, like 60-something% of them voted to stay in. They want to stay at all costs, and that means that we're going to go through some weird things where maybe the rest of the UK leaves and Scotland joins, and Scotland stays, because this has actually happened before, where part of the country has left and part of the country has stayed, but it was always the biggest it's happened once before with the Greenland and Denmark, though that was 1% of the country leaving and 99% staying. We might end up with a situation where like something like 80% of 90% of the UK stays, and 90% of the UK leaves, but 10% stays, but calls itself the UK, so it can keep the UK's seat and the UK's pound. I don't know, things are going to get weird on that one, but that's another whole issue. Gibraltar, an overseas territory of the UK, to stay in the EU would have to be partly controlled by Spain, or would have to be its own separate thing. How do you have an island be a separate part of the EU? There's all these big questions, and then, like I mentioned, there's 3 months until we're actually going to be hitting the button to leave, and this is a big deal, because in 4 days, we've seen massive amounts of value wiped off the world markets. I think 2 trillion is one estimate. You can look up your own numbers and believe what you want to believe there. But basically, yeah, the pound has fallen quite a bit. The FTSE 100, our stock markets, they have fallen quite a bit, if not in relative terms, then at least in absolute terms because of the pound. Basically, things are going pretty crazy. The world is going, we don't know what's happening. Because again, there's no precedent for a country, especially not a country that is the 3rd biggest EU country, the 5th biggest economy in the world, leaving a trading bloc like this, the effect it has on them, the effect it has on us. And all of this is going to happen for 3 more months. It's not going to be the same level. I'm not going to be one of those people that says, well, if we've gone down like 20% in 4 days, I guess that means that in 90 days we'll go down 22.9 times 20. I guess that means we'll go down 400% in the next, 90 days. That's not going to happen. There is going to be some recovery, then some more falls. But there's been stuff like job freezes. There's been a lot of stuff where people are like, there's uncertainty, an insane amount of it, we're going to back off. And that means in 3 months, when there is a new leader of the Conservative Party, and also, by the way, Labour, the opposition, so there's 2 big parties in the UK, the other party is having massive pressure to resign their leader and elect a new one. There's going to be 2 massive new elections, and both of the people then have to come to some conclusion about what they think about this. And if you decide to hit the button after 3 months of all this kind of negativity, just on the result that you might hit the button, should you then do it? And obviously they're going to have to, but will they want to? What if they don't? Are they allowed to not? Well, they actually are, because the thing about the referendum is it was non-binding. It's a non-binding referendum, which means it's advisory. So there's been 3 elections across the entire UK. I believe, but the other 2 are actually binding. For some reason, maybe they were clever, but this one wasn't actually binding. So they can ignore the government can actually just ignore the result, and that's a terrible, terrible idea. You don't have a referendum to ignore the result. But what if you need to? So. Again, this is where things get really, really interesting. I don't think they should. This is a ridiculous move. But bear in mind, they have the ability to, and 500 of the 650 MPs we have in the UK are pro-stay, which means to actually get this through, to have the vote in the House of Commons, they need to then have people that believe in democratic ability above their own thing. And you might think, yeah, of course, they'll vote for the people. But these people might not, because of the fact that, because of the fact that most elected systems, like the US's, like the UK's, we're not actually direct democracies. And the reason we're not direct democracies is because it's called like a peasant's rate. There's a lot of reasons why you don't have a direct democracy. We don't set our own income tax rate. We elect people that set our income tax rate. We don't decide whether to fight wars. We elect people who decide for us whether we should fight a war. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. You can get into the pros and cons. But I think people as a whole, whether they know they agree with it or not, do agree with the idea of representative democracy. But direct democracy should take precedent over representative democracy. Because even though we elected these people that are for the EU and have said they're for the EU, because we then had a vote saying we should leave the EU, should they switch their opinion on the vote, or should they stay with their 2015 vote? And there's been a lot of people suggesting that, yeah, they should just stay with their 2015 vote, and we should get past this. We know it's going to be bad, but then there's also the argument of, do you just go against the people? I think the vast majority of people on the planet would say, no, you should not. But again, after 3 months of this craziness, should you? Okay, but then even once you've hit the button, because we're gonna have to assume they're gonna hit the button, to leave the EU. Even once you do that, and you're like, okay, we have to listen to the people, which again they're gonna have to. Like you can't get away with not. It's gonna be suicide to hit it, and it's gonna be suicide to not. So they're gonna hit it because again, you don't want to be that guy who was like, screw the public. So yeah, they're gonna hit the button right after all this debate over whether they actually should. Then you've got 2 years to negotiate with other EU states whether or not, what deal you're actually going to get. So in this 2 years, you have to, 1, renegotiate with the EU to try and find something, but 2, negotiate all the international deals you've got through the EU. Because even though, as an independent member, we'll be able to negotiate our own deals, we have to get those in place to be able to trade with the US, trade with Chile, trade with insert country here. So while doing that and also negotiating with the EU, we have to then get a deal that allows everyone to not go crazy. Because bear in mind, if we suddenly cut ourselves off and we're not allowed in and they're not allowed in, that's not going to happen. But let's say we did that. That would be bad. No one actually wants that. Not most of the Leave campaigners don't want that. There's probably some people that do, but most people don't want that. We want some degree of cooperation with Europe. We just don't want to be part of a political body, right? So that's what the UK wants. But the only deal that really comes close to having full trade and not losing all the jobs, etc., is it's called the European Economic Area. I spoke about it in another video, and the reason that is a big is because to join the European Economic Area, you gain the ability of having full sovereignty. The European Union can't force you to do anything. They can just kick you out, worst case scenario. You get sovereignty, you have to implement less of their laws, but in exchange for that, in exchange for staying part of the market, 1, you have to pay membership fees still, which would be the same we pay right now, but we wouldn't get all the money we get back from that, so we'd be paying. So right now, I don't know them, I think it's 350 million a week, and then we get something like 280 million back, depending on how you want to count it, so we basically pay 70 million a week. Instead, we'd be paying 350 million a week, and we'd just be paying 350 million a week. So it'd be 330 million a week. But it'd be some amount of money without even getting the rebate, without getting all the funding back. And we then wouldn't have any representation in creating the laws, some of which we would still have to listen to if we wanted to stay part of the thing. So that's the deal that everyone wants to go for because they're pro everything in the EU, but anti, we can't ignore the people. But that is a inherently worse deal than what we have right now, but by most means and measures, which means we're now in a situation where to listen to the people, we have to do something that is inherently worse than our current option in exchange for democracy. And again, I think you have to do that because the other options are either negotiate a brand new deal, which might happen, that's the best case scenario, and the other option is go alone and not isolate entirely, but go alone, don't have free movement, have a visa system, have all that stuff, and lose a lot of trade with Europe, which is So yeah, why is UK politics going to be interesting to see in the next few months? First of all, we're getting at least 1, if not 2 new leaders. Second of all, Scotland are very, very upset with the rest of the UK, and they are showing it, and they're going to try and get out of this in any way possible. Same with Northern Ireland, same with Gibraltar. Third of all, in 3 months, when it comes to actually pulling out of the EU, people are going to be very hesitant to do it, and we're going to have to see how things exactly go. You can't ignore a referendum, but people are going to say more and more that you should, and that's going to be a fun argument to watch, and that's why UK politics is crazy. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to say about this. I don't think I expressed any crazy opinions besides, well, looks like some crazy stuff's happening, and yeah, I look forward to watching this. Maybe you will all too. Maybe I should update you. Maybe I shouldn't. Let me know what you think of these videos. Let me know if you are like, well, as you can see there, you've got a pro You bias because you said that we pay them money a week or something. Comments, they're for you and for me. They're for both of us. Goodbye.